Audible. I would like for the POIs to also be audible because I won't be able to see you for some of the time. Okay. May I start? Honorable panel, we live in a world where social media essentially inherits everything we have. 60% of the population is actively using it. And on this platform, these platforms, a lot of these people are marginalized, a lot of these people are hated on, and there's a lot of this franchise movements going on in there. So what I'll do in my speech today. So first of all, I'll present to you our framing. Secondly, I will go through my constructive argument. So firstly, why this policy is justified, and secondly, I'll be talking about marginalized groups. And then Emma, in her second speech, will present her constructive case, which is deterring radical ideas. But before I move on to my constructive, let's move on to the framing. So how does the status quo look like? I already explained to you in our intro that there's a lot of minorities that are already disenfranchised in the status quo. A lot of them get bullied, a lot of this happens, and I'll tackle that later on in my constructive. So what do we define as social media? So websites and applications that enable users to create and share content or to participate in social networking such as Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, Twitch, YouTube. So what is the comparative in this debate? On our side, there is censorship. On op, there is none. Now let's move on to the model framing. 2 points here. First point, how? Who is in charge of this censorship? So companies would set up independent organs that work in cooperation with the social media platforms that are in charge of censorship. So independent organs equal to groups of experts from the field that are differently opinionated, plus completely independent, work in cooperation with the social media platform, just to note again. Now, B, how do they know what to censor? Posts go into reviewing of the commission if, 2 points here. First of all, algorithms pick on trigger words such as the N-word, images with hate symbols. Secondly, upon other users of the app reporting a comment or a post. Then, this independent organ decides if it's okay to censor. Censoring here meaning to put down or delete, plus if a person's content gets deleted multiple times, they can lose access to the platform. Now moving on to the second point, what do we censor? So A, posts, public posts, pictures you post on Instagram, tweets, Snapchat, and stories. Here we exclude private messages. B, when it comes to content, hate speech, any speech that expresses hate or encourages violence towards a person or group based on something such as race, religion, sex, or sexual orientation. This especially means any hate towards marginalized groups and individuals like LGBT+ community and racial minorities. When it comes to the topic of fake news, any information presented as news is held in analogy innocent until proven guilty. To note, we exclude from censoring all things that are for educational purposes or to raise awareness, such as PETA or UNICEF content. Now let's move on to my constructive. So my first argument, why this policy is justified. The thesis of this argument is that because of 3 fundamental important reasons, it is legitimate to allow and support the censorship of social media. First of all, when they don't censor it, it is harmful for the social media company, i.e. they can't sell their commercial slots if it is associated with something bad. Plus, users leave if they feel bullied or the narrative of the environment is not safe or they can't make money or the company can't make money off them. So this is bad for the platform. I'll explain that later on in the third point here. Secondly, Facebook, Instagram are not a public square or a bar. These platforms are like publishing houses, meaning if they do not want to publish something, they do not have to. Just like The Guardian does not have to publish every story, or just like Hollywood doesn't have to use every script, they do not have to publish everything. They are a company. They have zero obligation to publish something if they don't want to, especially if it is detrimental to the people that are on that website. Now, thirdly, they have an obligation to their users. Users are exposed to toxic content, fake news, bullying, hate speech. These same users bring profit to the social media companies by watching ads, paying subscriptions, etc. Thus, it is an obligation of the companies to create a safe space for them. As soon as you make money off them, it is not only legitimate to protect them, but it's an obligation. Because they make this money, they're justified and morally obliged to help them. Now let's move on to my second argument, which is talking about marginalized groups. 3 points here. First of all, the characterization. These marginalized groups have a perception of themselves because of the status quo, because of social media, because not a lot of people like them, because they can't be defended, because they can't defend themselves. They're disprivileged. They experience great amount of hate speech, not only based off of social media, but also on it. Because as I explained, 60% of the people in this world use social media, but But what happens here? You base your opinion. This is what these 60 people will do. 60% of people do on the serve. Now, secondly, let's move on to perception of others and why not censoring makes it even worse. So let's say how people see them. So for example, a woman, when she sees something like is being attacked, and she'll be less confident to do something because of the normalized bullying on social media, it impacts her interaction of self-confidence. This is not just for women, but everyone, for people of color, gays, religious people. Now, what kind of impact does this have? Especially on minorities, because they have this internalized self-hatred. They have this loathing and loss of self-confidence. No, thank you. Now, how does this censorship help? How people see them and perceive them? So here we say that does not put minorities through emotional distress that they get on the side of opposition. We actively prevent harm from happening. Now let's move on to the third topic on how people see them, how they are focused. In the status quo, future employers go on social media and see, for example, from a populist person like Donald J. Trump, or from someone else spewing rhetoric that Mexicans are lazy snobs and they don't do anything good. That is actively bad for the marginalized groups. No, thank you. So why is that? Because they build up perception. They internalize the stereotype that Mexicans don't work. Meaning, on an ad for upcoming job employment, these people will already have a creative perception because of social media. They'll have this internalized hatred and prevent them to get a job. They will long-termly harm them just because of the stereotype that is created and brainwashed. Not only does this happen here, but also voting. Because you have this internalized hating, you will also shift your demographic view of the political sphere. You will now vote for Donald J. Trump. Maybe now you will vote for Donald J. Trump because he likes this rhetoric, because other people are spewing this rhetoric at you. Now, because of that, you will not only harm the minority from getting, or these minorities or people from getting these jobs, you're also shaping the form. Because let's look at that. For example, America is highly influenced, and because of Donald J. Trump's rhetoric tweets, populist tweets, 50% of people still voted for him. Now let's move on to the last point on children and bullying in school and internalizing patterns. It does not only happen in the workplace, it also harms young people because they are more influential, they're more easily manipulated, and they will base this opinion off of these 60% of the people on the world. And this is what they're gonna happen. And on our side, we stop normalizing hate towards minorities on social media. And we make it so that they do not get harmed. We make it so they can live in a comfortable space. So if you're for all of that, dear honorable panel, go with the side of proposition.
Thank you, Nate. Now, for the first speaker from side opposition, I invite you to begin with your case.
If I could have my POIs audible, please. Panel, for a side that supports minorities and to say that we don't want minorities to be bullied, that we don't want minorities to face certain criticism, they're the very side who pushes the problem away to different echo chambers in different social or different media platforms, rather than actually address the systemic problems in our society that we do so much better at the point in which we have discourse where people are actually able to look at a problem and say that it's wrong and say that it's BS. Three things in this speech. One, a bit of talking about the framing that proposition gives to you. Two, about minorities. And three, about normalization. Quickly also talking about their idea of stereotypes are created. Firstly, they say companies that are independent people would be able to do this job of censoring social media and things like that. One, what does this mean? How can someone be judged as independent? What are the criteria of which someone becomes an independent observer of something? It's very vague to just assume that people are naturally apolitical and people are just naturally unaffiliated with anything, simply because they aren't part of a political party or something. We need adequate analysis from proposition if they want to claim any impact in terms of what is actually being censored is unbiased. Two, we say that structurally you cannot be independent as an individual. At the point in which you have gone through certain life experiences, at the point in which you have gone through certain like things in the past, at the point at which you have subscribed to certain ideologies, at least to a certain extent, you are structurally unable to be part of a, like, you're structurally unable to be independent and look at something objectively. Insofar as literally everything you do is a political statement. Insofar as you're passive, it's a political statement. If you do something, it's equally a political statement. So what political statements do proposition want to ban or censor is very unclear. Two, they try to sway out of this motion when they say we want to exclude things like education, but crucially we want to exclude things like spreading awareness. One, that means they concede, no thank you, to neo-Nazi spreading awareness as well, right? They support the idea that neo-Nazis can go on Facebook and post things that say Jews are problematic and black people are problematic. This thing goes both ways. It's not just BLM that's on Facebook, it's also neo-Nazi groups, it's also fascists, it's also anti-abortion people. And furthermore, at the point at which they say private messages would still be allowed, sure, they may decrease the marginal effectivity of these policies, but inevitably they have the exact same things on their side of the house, because you can still bully someone who's a minority through a private message. You can still do the exact same things. We're not really sure how they're solving anything in terms of social media. Then they say that minorities are not bullied at the point at which we have censorship of social media, because we censor things such as like N-words and things like that are problematic. One, they need to give you analysis why the words or the things that are said on social media actually impact you in real life emotionally, right? We say that you can simply delete your account, you can simply block this person, you can simply go away. This isn't something that necessarily, no thank you, changes something in society. I asked for verbal POIs, by the way, Nejc. Secondly, they talk about how stereotypes are created, insofar as people like Mexicans are seen as lazy and things like that, and these start in social media. Firstly, we just reject the fact that these start on social media. These start on things like political rallies, like what Donald Trump started, and sure, maybe perpetuated on social media, but will exist on both sides of the house. And two, on their side of the house, social medias are not busted because they never, stereotypes are not busted because they don't come out into the forelight in the first place. Whereas on our side of the house, we just generally believe that people don't only consume the media passively. Inevitably, we think that people are likely to break stereotypes. We think they're likely to challenge like assumptions under these stereotypes. We think that's hugely beneficial, majorly beneficial. I'm going to talk to you about that in my argument. Thirdly, they talk about normalization. One, we think normalization simply doesn't happen because the vast majority of people we think would be more empowered by the things that are being happening, right? They would realize that at the point at which someone is like doing something racist, doing something this, it means that on proposition, they would simply not exist, which means that people would believe that something has been done. Whereas on our side of the house, we see that people actually care about different communities, and we want people to be able to engage in rational discourse with individuals to convince them or ameliorate their opinion to a certain degree. But even if their case, even if they win the idea of normalization, recognize that there is no real comparative. At the point in which, on their side of the house, neo-Nazis just simply go to 4chan and other different sites, that you can do the exact same thing on those sites as well. You can have even worse echo chambers, and insofar as that is true, the effects on minorities for these echo chambers is monstrously higher. Two arguments I'm going to give to you. First, on a principle that Instagram, Facebook, social media does not have the right to decide what its people should do. What are the criteria on which we censor things? We think generally when the populace deem something, no thank you, unacceptable in society. This is usually done through voting for representatives to create, enforce, and judge laws, and this mandate must be incessant insofar as people vote every 4 years and things like that. Why does Instagram simply not have this right? Because Instagram isn't controlled by the populace. It's controlled by a board of directors who are usually rich white men who don't really symbolize the average Joe. Rather, the average Joe on these sites has the right to spread their own political opinion and social opinion, no matter how heinous and obscene they may be, and then they should have the right to challenge that opinion to a degree, to whatever degree they want. How does this look like? One, it looks like cancel culture. At the point in which someone says extremely problematic things, you take them down. Two, you take them down, meaning people take them down, not the companies. Two, deplatforming individuals who say demeaning things. Inevitably, this happens because people do not necessarily control them or use the media only passively. Furthermore, second argument about why there are harms of censorship on society insofar as things are banned and things are censored, right? Because recognize what censorship actually occurs is when they have independent people questioning how independent they are, you can sway a popular opinion of a vast coalition of people because using their own characterization, a lot of people use social media. But we think that Instagram and other such sites will attack the most vulnerable, insofar as one, they have an incentive to preserve status quo because the board of directors, white rich men, benefits handsomely from status quo, and two, because they depend on ad revenue and they want to have a good image. Therefore, they're less likely to support radical changes in society like BLM and abolish the police. Why is this problematic? Because one, it manipulates the opinion of people and can swing elections politically, and two, it prevents adequate criticism of status quo. But even if they're not encouraging, even if they're not putting away these like Black Lives Matter movements, there's the difference of censoring also means that you don't have adequate discourse. At the point in which pictures, statements, words aren't actually shared, but people still maintain personal opinions with little amelioration. At the point in which we have these things on the social media, we're more likely to, one, have people open up about their political views because intrinsically, internet makes us anonymous, and therefore discourse manifests because people disagree with each other because nobody actually goes to a Trump video and just passively agrees with everything he says. For all these reasons, I'm very proud to stand in opposition. You should do the same.
Thank you, Aniket. Now I would invite the second speaker from Side Proposition, Emma, to begin with her speech.
Can you hear me okay? Okay, cool. I had some issues with the Zoom. I hope everything will be okay. However, like, just a heads up. Dear panel, you need to know that the discussion going on in the comment sections Aniket wants to talk about is not what he presents. Because not every individual on Facebook is a debater that will write full-on flagged arguments with links why someone is wrong. Usually the discussions going on social media is hatred, is people calling each other names, and is pointing out personal flaws. This is a discussion that is currently going on in the social media. We think it's toxic. We want to put an end to it once and for all. This is what we vote on. However, three important things in my second prop, right? First is some responses to what we heard from Aniket, then what Nejc told you still is standing in this debate, and then I'll be moving to my third constructive, where I'll be talking about how on our side we are better at deterring the spread of radical ideas and mindsets. So firstly, know that like when they want to attack our model and they ask ourselves what truly is being independent, we think that Nejc gave you a clear characterization in his model that there will be people from both sides of the house, right? Like from both sides of the gradient, you will not only have far-right people like censoring those kind of things, you will also have the leftists, and this is when they came to a consensus. However, even if you do not believe that, and you say that this is not possible, we tell you that we will like ban hate speech. And I think that every single individual can see that, like, for example, someone writing on Facebook that Jews should go and kill themselves, that this clearly is hate speech, regardless of your history, regardless of your political affiliation. We think that you can recognize what hate speech is and then be equipped to ban it. We think that on our side, this is completely possible. We think that people are not stupid, do not buy the side of opposition's analogy. However, secondly, when they are talking about how those kind of comments do not affect people emotionally, I think this is actually quite false at the point at which you have the rise of depression, like in teenagers, right? That are primarily, like, their primary source of information is the social media, and they are extremely vulnerable groups that are constantly getting hate on social media, and people are constantly hating on them, like going after minorities. We think that this does impact people a lot, and those kind of individuals have the ability and should have the right, and they get that on our side of the house, to be able to use social media and not feel safe, feel secure, without getting death threats or without people calling them names simply based on their skin color. Secondly, we tell you why there is less hate on our side. Note that even if we buy the characterization of the side of opposition and take them at their best, say that people do go into echo chambers, we still think this is better to happen on our side. Why? Because at the point to which they are into echo chambers and they're not writing like rude and neo-Nazi posts or comments, firstly, less people see that, less people have the ability to think that this idea is good and internalize it and then practice it out in real life. However, secondly, we tell you not only do they have a smaller influence, it's easier for those radical people to find themselves and like to connect between each other, right? This means that you have less people in a group having the same political opinion, and as long as you have smaller groups of radical, for example, far right, they have less power, and because they have less power, because they're in smaller groups, they're less strong, and this is how we think that it's better on our side, even if you take opposition at their best. However, secondly, However, secondly, right now let's talk about what Aniket told you. Firstly, he told you, you know, like on the people on social media, and it should be the government, that like the companies are not the government and they should not have the right to censor it. Know that like when you go into the social media and we sign into Facebook or stuff like that, you write a consent form, you accept their terms and conditions. When they tell you that they will censor you when you are, for example, not behaving correctly, many of the people do give a clear consent to those kind of companies that they will do that. However, also like there were no clear links to why exactly it has to be the government in order to do that. We were quite confused. Hope they clear out that up in the second speech. However, second argument when they are talking about how companies want to keep the status quo, thus they're unlikely to do that. Know that companies share with body characterization that they are profit and they have the profit incentive, right? This is exactly why in the status quo companies are the ones censoring those kind of things, because Nejc told you in his first argument the analysis that directly clashes with this argument, because companies and like social media platforms will not be able to sell their commercial slots if they're people like being nasty and rude on their social media. This is because the companies do not want to be associated with them. This is why it's in the interest of the companies to actually keep those platforms safe in order to keep making money. And also at the point at which people do not feel safe on social media, they are less likely to use it. No, thank you, Živa. Comparatively, those social media companies have less followers, right? It is in their interest to protect their followers and to protect the users of their apps in order to make money. We think that this is beneficial. So moving on to the third constructive about how we are better able to deter the spread of radical ideas and mindset on our side. In the status quo, you have those groups on internet and they need to be stopped. We think that it has gone too far because we're seeing more and more interest in the harmful ideologies, such as young people like having growing respect amongst for example, for example, Nazis or the KKK, and all of those people are supporting the radical policies and those kind of far-right politicians. We think that those kind of ideologies are extremely harmful for the society, and currently they are giving platform on social media, and by censoring, we can put an end to it once and for all. So I think that we are helping this on two grounds. Firstly, because those kind of groups get a smaller influence, and it's harder for them to attract new followers. We think this is beneficial because now, for example, a radical like KKK member can post a group on something on Facebook, and more people will see it on their side of the house, right? At the point at which almost 60% of Americans use social media, at least someone will get in contact with that, and at least someone will come across the comment, and someone will be able to actually like get in touch with the same radical ideas and internalize them and carry them out in the future. We think the censorship thus is good because we're able to prevent at least a small amount of people from getting in touch with such harmful ideologies. And when we have less people getting in touch with such harmful ideologies, we think it's beneficial for the marginalized groups. And if you're able to protect the marginalized group, at least to some extent know that the side of opposition is doing it, is not doing anything about it. So this is why we're better at benefiting the minorities. However, also second reason why this is bad, you tell it because you give, by allowing such comments, you are moving the overtone window to the right? Overtone window is essentially this concept in political science of what we find as an average Joe radical. We think that when the point of which social media is saturated by a lot of these far-right radical ideas that are on social media, you will get simply used to them, and you will not be as surprised when you see them carried out in real life, right? For example, 4 years ago, when Trump was beginning his presidency, him saying that he will build a wall was something so radical for us all. However, 4 years later, after constant tweeting and constantly getting in touch with those radical ideas, we think that now you as an individual are like more, you got used to those ideas, meaning that you're less likely to be critical when it comes to seeing those kind of views possessed. Comparatively, on our side, what happens when less of those kind of opinions get out, you are not getting used to the radical far-right ideology, and you're more likely to be critical of it when it comes out to, for example, being a policy or a politician that you'll be voting on. Comparatively, because we're better at like not moving the overtone window, but also we are better for the marginalized group, go for the side of the government.
Thank you, Emma. And now for the second speech of side opposition, I invite you to begin.
Just a second. The side of proposition lives in a world where actually racism is not that big of a problem, and we can just hide it with just banning the N-word being said on social media. Well, on the side of opposition, we tell you that that is absolutely not the problem in this debate. So what happens on the side of opposition, I'm going to discuss in my speech. I'm going to go through general negation, and then I'm going to talk about my third argument, which is going to be about the censorship system is inherently perpetuating the sexist system and also taking away the rights of women. Okay, first let's start with the negation and then my third argument. Okay, first of all, on the basis of stereotypes and normalization. Look, here we have 2 points of analysis. First of all, they come up here and say, look, if you see something on the internet, you're gonna get normalized and stuff like that. Look, if I see times and times again somebody saying anorexia is good, I'm not gonna say, oh yes, maybe anorexia is good. No, what I'm actually going to do is every single time I'm going to go against it because I don't agree with it, because I know it's wrong. And that's what we are doing in this debate. This discussion is actually happening. People are not just magically realizing something is good. People are not just randomly saying, yeah, no, thank you, it's too early. People are not just randomly saying, oh, okay, Trump is now good, like because we're normalized, he can build the wall. No, what we actually see is Trump being voted out of office because he's so problematic. We don't see him being normalized. But second of all, look, people who are going to be racist and sexist and all stuff like that, they're going to exist no matter what they're going to do. If they're already normalized, they're not going to change it with just canceling the N-word because they're still going to be empowered and still going to do this stuff. But okay, let's discuss on the basis of like what is the social media going to actually do and why will the ban actually like people off, why they will ban, for example, minorities and stuff like that and not benefit the people of the majority. Look, what we have to realize is that the Instagram is actually working, yes, for the majority of people. And the majority of people are not the minorities. The majority of people are people of color. And this is what is going to happen. They're not going to be the empowered one. The empowered one are going to be the white people because this is who the Instagram and like this sort of social media platforms are going after because they present the majority. Hence, they're not going to actually be empowering these people. Okay, but let's more discuss about this big point about bullying and how this is so bad. Look, first of all, what we have to realize is bullying is going to exist on the side of proposition in the form of private messages. And what we tell you is this is actually a lot more worse because what happens is we don't have this reactionary like people coming in and saying, no, this is wrong, we don't agree with that. We just have a random, for example, 12-year-old sitting there looking at her phone and being fed this kind of like hateful speech. And she cannot do anything because she's a 12-year-old as they're trying to present. And this is a huge problem. But second of all, when they come up here and say, look, what happens is everything is gonna be okay. We tell you that no, what actually becomes is that we have this internalized hatred even more on the side of proposition because this little girl is unable to actually respond. Now what happens, we have a response on the side of opposition. And why is the response so important? Because discussion happens. Look, on the side of proposition, they're trying to characterize that this discussion is just like angry screaming and stuff like that. We tell you that first of all, okay, angry screaming is angry, and we want that. We want people to be angry because it's about their basic human rights. We want people from the left, for example, being angry if somebody is angry towards them. And we want people to see that. We want people to see how passionate they are about these problems. What happens on the side of proposition is we don't see, for example, people who don't care about these problems, don't see these people actually having very active discussion. But second of all, these discussions are actually very a lot of times actually constructive because people actually care about this stuff and want to discuss it. But second of all, look, this point about like bad groups, like the rightist populist groups and stuff like that. Look, what we have to realize is that two things are going to happen. First thing is that these groups are just going to move to echo chambers, to dark web and, for example, 4chan and stuff like that. So what will happen is we will have bigger echo chambers. Why is this bad? Because radicalization can happen on a more massive level. What happens is these people are actually able to do whatever they want because nobody is actually there to come up there and say no. And what happens is they're able to actually radicalize themselves more, pat themselves on their backs more, and able to, like, for example, make bigger rallies and stuff like that. But second of all, on the basis of like what can also happen is that they are becoming more censored in the current system. So what happens is they're able to infiltrate people more in a more easier thing. Because what happens is if we say, okay, look, we are living in a censored society and we have, for example, a very, very rightist group still being there on the platform, what this means is possibly not the bad guys. No, thank you, Nejc. And what happens is we actually have them being able to feed the education and good sides of them to the people themselves. Hence, they're still able to influence the people and still able to touch them and still able to do some massive impact. But on the side of opposition, what we have is we have, for example, Black Lives Matter able to have their voices because they're not seen as a violent movement, but actually they're seen as like people who are able to express themselves. But now let's talk about our third argument, which is the censorship system is inherently perpetuating the sexist system. Look, 3 points here. First of all, Instagram already has some censorship measures implemented. What is to be censored is written in terms of conditions. The problem we have with them is that they're many times sexist. 2 examples here. First of all, the conditions ban certain features on women and not on men. They're banned because they're seen as sexual. On women, for example, we give you nipples. If a woman posts a topless selfie with nipples showing, the algorithm directly bans the sad selfie, they make it inappropriate. Second of all, there is also further discrimination among women themselves. Women who are not following the traditional beauty standards, that is to say women of color, plus-sized women, disabled women, etc., are also being like banned for doing the exactly same thing that cis white women are doing. For example, pictures of plus-sized models are being banned by the Instagram algorithm, while pictures of Kendall Jenner are being praised. Second of all, what is Instagram banning this sort of content from women lead to? 4 things. First of all, 3 things. So idea of a woman as an inherently sexual creature is being perpetuated. Because again, a part of her is being sexually marked through a huge platform such as Instagram as sexual. This contributes to a world where nipples can only be shown when it profits the sexist system. When, for example, we have it on Playboy magazines. But when a woman wants to empower herself through, for example, posting this, this is not okay and it's being banned. Second of all, the conditions what should be banned and what not use binary gendered language, which by design erases the experience of trans and non-binary people. For example, a non-binary person showing a nipple was banned, even though they do not identify as a woman or not, nor even a man. And this is very problematic. And third of all, young girls do not see this representation. When the side of proposition wants to talk about representation, young girls don't see, for example, plus-sized women in bikinis, hence they do not feel as empowered. On the side of opposition, what we have is we have this platform where women can actually post stuff and women are not actually being banned. Hence, it creates a safety net where between themselves, they can empower themselves and they can protect themselves from the hate from, for example, men or the sexist system, which is called patriarchy. Thank you.
Thank you, Hana. And now for the third speaker from side proposition.
Am I audible? Thank you. Dear Judge, I do not remember a single critical discussion, for example, on the subreddit titled rape jokes. This kind of things do not happen on social media. Social media is not debating world. Not everyone will go on and argue. No, people just ignore stuff. People do not get triggered by stuff because they're so normal, because they happen all the time. I will not go, even I, a debater, and like really engage with this stuff, I will not go and comment on every single like homosexuality is bad, just because simply like I have gotten used to it because it is so prevalent, it is everywhere, and I simply will not act on it. Now, the 3 important points in this debate. Firstly, I'd like to make some clarifications, especially about the frame. Secondly, on the principal clash, and lastly, on the practical clash. Now, on the frame, we tell you that this is very important. We do not have to defend all censorship that exists in the world. I don't know where did we say that we would defend like censorship Black Lives Matter or that we would support censorship of women's nipples. No, just because we support censorship does not mean that we have to stand by every single act of censorship, no thank you, that was ever made, right? We see this as them like trying to change the motion. Secondly, on their stuff about how we do not have independent observers. What we mean by this is we mean diverse people. Even if an individual is not completely independent, we want to create a pool of people that are different races, that are different genders, that have different political beliefs, right? So even if they have certain biases, altogether, we don't have a bias, right? Altogether, we don't have these biases coming through. And furthermore, we also explained to you that we would have algorithms. It is very hard to go against that. It is very it is a very simple principle of just censoring everything a white person said with the end roll, right? We don't see where this could go wrong. Secondly, about this point about how we are excluding educational content and how now everything can be perceived as educational content. I just think there's a huge difference between a neo-Nazi and a history channel. I think generally people understand where this is a channel like PETA, an organization that actually wants to educate, and an individual that spreads their beliefs. And lastly or thirdly, what do we actually censor? Again, we tell you now, thank you, that we censor fake news and hate speech that goes against the marginalized group. We never said anything about nipples. We never said anything about Black Lives Matter. Now, to the principal clash in this debate. Firstly, we told that companies are private entities and have their own platform that they created. Hence, they're allowed to say if they do not want something on their platform, right? And we tell you that they're very likely to actually have this censorship of hate speech because this shows a bad light on their platform. Even if you take their point and say that we could they could censor Black Lives Matter, I don't think that they would do this. Why? Because Black Lives Matter is an extremely popular movement, and people would simply there would be huge amounts of backlash if they were to go against this. However, I think that they would go against hate speech, people telling other people to kill themselves, because companies simply would not want to participate in this because they will not get sponsorship, they will not get ads if they are affiliated with hate. Secondly, why hate speech excluded from the freedom of speech, from the freedom of expression, so on and so forth? We thought that this hate speech directly infringes upon the rights of minorities. It infringes on their right to safety. It infringes sometimes in their life to live. It infringes on their self-expression. We thought that your freedom stops where another person's freedom begins, and clearly you're infringing on other people's freedom. But at the end of the day, what we have to question is, who do we value more? Do we value more speech from marginalized groups with high historic oppression, or do we value more speech from the oppressed? And I think this is a very easy decision to make, and this should not be such a big deal into this debate. Now, to the practical clash in 3 points. Firstly, I'll talk about critical thinking. Secondly, on deterring radical ideas. And lastly, on minorities. Now, critical thinking. They completely mischaracterized the idea of social media, what is actually happening in social media, because I cannot even remember when I actually read a quality discussion, a quality debate in the comments of the social media. No, when I go to social media, I mainly just see people using caps, saying extremely dangerous and problematic stuff. I don't see them actually responding and engaging. So, furthermore, we tell you that what is hate speech? Hate speech is something based on emotions, right? And you cannot counteract this with arguments. Even if I were to go and convince someone that they are wrong for saying that homosexuality is bad, I would not be able to do that. Why? Because they come from a place of emotion. They come from a place where they simply hate these people, where they simply feel disgusted being around this sort of people, and I will not be able to make sense to them if their reason does not come from an argumentative point of view, right? So no, you cannot negate hate speech with arguments. However, what happens on our side, at the point of which people cannot provide hate speech, if they want to spread their ideas, they have to provide arguments. They have to provide the reasons to spread their ideas. Politicians that are very populist and just say Mexicans are bad, so on and so forth, now have to provide concrete reasons why building a wall is good, and they cannot diss Mexicans in the process, right? What happens is this betters the discussion because people are actually now providing arguments which can be rebutted. Secondly, on deterring radical ideas. Now, this is a comparative between us saying we reach less people and them saying that they radicalize in the echo chambers. Firstly, this idea of all of them going into dark web is extremely unlikely. I don't think that the average Joe even knows what dark web is. Secondly, we tell you that in status quo or like their world, there is no discussion, right? Even in the status quo, when we don't have discussion, so this isn't such a big like factor, because in some way we still have echo chambers. But like the comparative here is that at the point at which you cannot like reach the amount of people, you cannot get more supporters in these groups. So the group will essentially be smaller, right? Because the people cannot learn your ideas if they cannot see your ideas on the mainstream media. Why do we prefer this over like a few radicalized people? Because like at the point when there is a bigger like group of people, they can harass more minorities, they have more voting power, and they have more like more power, right? Now, secondly, we tell that this also deters minorities from like actually expressing the minority point. We tell that this causes psychological harms to minorities and deters them from expressing them. So if you will not hear minority like actually saying their struggles, that you will only learn about their struggle from a person, from their oppressor, right? Which I think is extremely like detrimental. We think that minorities are not likely to actually share their struggles at the point at which they know that they will be attacked as soon as they do that. And lastly, we tell that normalization on social media happens. We tell that at the point at which you constantly see certain ideas, there's this overthrown window where you simply don't get triggered by this idea. Even if you still disagree, you simply do not get triggered because you're so used to them, and you do not get triggered when you encounter them in everyday life. I think this is extremely detrimental. Let's please vote for the side of our side. Thank you.
Thank you, Nika. And now, last but not least, I invite the third speaker from side opposition to conclude their case.
All right. Before I start my speech, I would just like to say that we should all be happy that Trump is not the next president of the United States for the next 4 years. It's a good thing. Not gonna stop oppression, but still great. Okay. What the side of proposition doesn't understand is that we live in a structurally racist, homophobic, sexist society. And at the point at which we're only censoring things, we're not going to stop. Because censorship is not going to come from the bottom, it is going to come from the top. Those are the cis white head men at the point at which those people are the most incentivized to keep the status quo. And at the point at which those people are the least likely to listen to minorities, it is highly unlikely that these people are going to be changing anything for the better. It is highly unlikely that these individuals are going to be censoring the things that we actually want them to censor. Because of that, even though proposition doesn't have to stand behind every censorship in history, they have to defend that what is probably going to happen is going to be more censorship on the side of progressive ideas. That is to say, people in general are more likely to be censored simply to be talking about their identities. For example, we give you the examples of YouTube censorships and with the point at which LGBT creators were censored. We give you the example at the point of TikTok censored Black Lives Matter protests. We believe that this is highly more likely to happen at the point at which a lot of Nazis are still having large platforms on both of those websites. Because of that, I think they have to engage with that comparative. In my speech, I'll go through the three main clashes. First one being the principle, second one being hateful action and on which side that happens more, and lastly, I'll mention the sexism part, which was not negated, I believe, from the side of proposition. But before that, I would like to remind you that personal harassment simply falls out of the debate. Why is that so? Because it is already illegal in general that we incite violence against individual people. You can actually have in court, and this is not censorship, this is an illegal action. But secondly, it can also happen in private messages at the point at which they're not censoring it. I don't understand how this is their strong point at this point. All right, let's start with the clashes. Let's start with the principle. What proposition brings you is two main justifications and one moral obligation. When we talk about the two main justifications, it is harmful for business and publishing, and it is a publishing company, and that therefore it can do whatever it wants. Irrespective of the actual analysis, which was in fact lacking in both of those points, we believe that those are justifications and not offensive principles. That is to say, at the point at which even if both of those are true, we are not going against their principle by those standards. But second, they talk about the moral obligation to their people. Know that this is a highly practically contingent argument, and because of that, at the point at which we win the practical, we are going to win the principle as well. However, we've actually proven to you with another principle that there is another principle at play in here. which is that we have to have power to the people. That is to say, the people have to be the ones that decide what is going to be censored in their platforms. Why? Because those are the individuals that are using these platforms, no thank you, and those are the individuals that are affected in the real world by what happens in these platforms. That is to say, these people should be able to do things like cancel culture and highlighting problems and creating this discourse inside of their lives. At the point of which we have censorship from the top down, we are disabling these things from happening for two main reasons. One, because a lot of the times cancel culture is in fact censored. At the point at which we are saying these people are highly problematic, a lot of the times these people are censored. But secondly, these individuals are less likely to have these individual acts for freedom and the individual acts for changing the environment of social media because they believe social media is already doing that and see it as a form of authority. Needless to say, let's start with the second clash, which is essentially hateful action, on which side it happens more. Okay, what proposition comes up and says is that harassment and hate ideas and bullying is going to be more normalized, and people are unlikely to help harass individuals or employ minorities and more likely to bully people in general. Note, firstly, three responses to that. Firstly, note that this presumes that the behavior is not already normalized in our current society, which is highly doubtful, no thank you, because we already exist in a sexist, racist, homophobic society, right? In which people see it normal to say bad things to minorities, in which people see it normal to demonize that one black kid in your class. Second response, in a world in which censorship happens on both sides of the house, no thank you, there's not going to be a discourse at the end of the day. That is to say, there's not going to be a response to these individuals as well. That is to say, at the point at which your friends are going to be racist, you're going to call them out. And at the point at which other people see this, they might make up their own mind based on your debating skills. And that is to say, we like this clash of ideas because we generally believe that the progressive ones are more likely to win because they make more sense. The third answer to that is that what does get normalized in our society and what proposition is actively censoring are the things that are not already normalized. That is to say, progressive ideas. That is to say, the LGBT community. That is to say, the Black Lives Matter movement that have not historically been normalized and oppressed throughout the ages. Social media is a unique way, no thank you, to actively change that. And at the point at which we're censoring things that we don't deem that we deem problematic for our society, we are disabling that mechanism. But then they talk about radicalization and how Nazi communities are on the rise, no thank you, because of Instagram. Sure, and how it is harder for recruitment at the point at which we're censoring them. Recognize that neo-Nazis currently aren't recruiting people on Facebook because they recognize that they're going to be banned. What are they doing is going on 4chan, on remote areas at the point at which they are more isolated and they're more likely to be more radicalized and are still very much effective. So why are they so effective? Because the process is a closed-off community in which they're isolating their members from outside. Now, why is that bad? Because we still believe that individuals that are more closed off and more radicalized can be more harmful on the comparison. Why is that so? Because when we believe that at the best case scenario, the proposition has to offer is that Trump would win on our side of the house. The problem here is that even if Biden wins, which he currently has, that he's not going to be attacking the structured and systematic racism that happens in our society. That is to say, racism is still going to exist under Biden, and we're not going to be solving those ideas. However, the radical individuals are actively going to be causing harm towards individuals in the forms of Charlottesville, in the forms of the Christ shooter, in the forms of such things. At the point at which that is so, and at the point at which people live in a state of fear simply for being a minority, that is a harm in its own. And then we talk about sexism, which we say it is very simple. We believe that women's bodies, at the point at which they're censored, they're inherently categorized as sexual. That is oppressive. At the point at which that is going to always be true, at the point at which there's going to be a top-down oppression, censorship, in which on the side of proposition, we believe that this is always going to happen. We should not let this happen and liberate the nipple. Thank you.
Thank you, Živa. And now for the reply speeches, I invite the side opposition to begin.
Am I audible? Great. Panel, for a side that says we shouldn't bully minorities, for a side that says we should change the problems in society by putting them away and not talking about them. They're the very people who manage to harm minorities the most through further radicalization. They're the side of the house that actually perpetuates these social ideas insofar as they aren't discussed because there's nothing to discuss about. Three things in this speech. Firstly, talking about the efficiency of their side. Secondly, talking about the harms of minorities, which is literally their only main constructive argument. And thirdly, about does discourse actually occur on our side of the house. But before that, I want to note that they have literally no engagement with our principle that talks about how power has to go to the people insofar as cancel culture and things like that are concerned, which we think is a relative good thing, at the point in which it's not rich white men at the top in the board of directors who set morally ambiguous standards of what is okay and what isn't. We think these standards aren't those that the majority of people subscribe to, and we think that these people who have to use Instagram and Facebook are the ones who live with the society that is created. We think they should be the ones who decide how the society looks. First clash on the efficiency of the model. Prop's model is exceedingly, almost laughably inefficient. Firstly, let's talk about private messages. All the things that they talk about on their side of the house, about how neo-Nazis can spread, about how people can bully other people of like different color and minority, can happen like on the exact same level on proposition. Hana gives you analysis why it's even worse insofar as there's no backlash to these private messages. There's no saying, no, this is wrong, this isn't cool. Rather, it's just one person getting bombarded with hate and things like that. This is something that all of their, this is a strategical error that all of their things that they talk about don't actually change on their side of the house. Neo-Nazis can still recruit and can still spread their ideas. Then they say independent people will be running these things. We still have a problem with this insofar as independent, firstly, is a shift, like the shift of like having a committee of people from different sides of the political spectrum comes in second prop. And even if that's the case, that includes people like fascists, that includes people like neo-Nazis who should be part of this committee. I'm not really sure how they're supporting the progressive values and helping minorities on their side of the house. Then they also say that they would support spreading awareness and they wouldn't ban things like Black Lives Matter. Under that logic, they wouldn't ban neo-Nazi movements either spreading awareness because they can do that on social media as well at this point, right? At this point, they can be able to reach out to people, a wide coalition of people, which proposition concedes are on social media. And furthermore, let's talk about this incitement of violence point. Recognize incitement of violence is illegal. It falls out of this debate. It's irrelevant insofar as if I tell Živa to go kill Hana, it's illegal and I go to prison. End of story, not part of this debate. Secondly, let's talk about harms to minorities. They say they wouldn't ban BLM just because they said it in their model. But we give you two structural reasons why it's likely Instagram will ban BLM. Insofar as the board of directors benefits handsomely from status quo, and because ad revenues don't like to support things that actively challenge status quo, particularly because minorities aren't an important part of revenue in literally every country other than America. Then they say that words harm, right? Firstly, yes, perhaps, but then you can just delete your account, go somewhere else. This isn't something systemic. But two, they need to quantify the impacts of this insofar as they need to weigh it off against our impact of radicalization. Insofar as you have an echo chamber on 4chan for neo-Nazis, it's far more likely that violence will occur on that side at the point in which neo-Nazis are incited further and have more ability to go out and target Black people. Furthermore, there's no amelioration through discourse, and this is the last clash about does discourse actually occur. Their best evidence on proposition is that Nika hasn't been on a site that has had discourse that has been productive. On our side of the house, we give you, firstly, Živa has been to a site that has had discourse, and secondly, we give you structural reasons why it's likely to have discourse, insofar as if someone is attacking your dignity as a human being, as a Black person, as a Jew, as a gay person, you're likely to go against that. You're likely to respond, you're compelled to respond, because it's simply attacking your very being. For all these reasons, I'm very proud to stand in opposition. Back to you to say.
Thank you, Aniket. And now for the last speech of this debate of today's tournament, actually, I invite this proposition's reply speaker.
Am I audible? Can you hear me? Okay, cool. Honorable panel, what I think the side of opposition in this debate does not realize is that not every person in the status quo is a debater. Not everyone is educated and not everyone is willing to debate the people that are posting hateful comments on social media. most people will simply sweep by them, and because it's something radical, they will want to support it, they will want to know more. This is exactly why we need to take this content off the social media, because it's harmful and we need to stop spreading it. Firstly, a clarification about our model. Look, we tell you that those commissions that we would have are completely independent, at the point to which you have a lot of people with different backgrounds deciding on the situation, and also you have algorithms that are also completely unbiased, at the point to which this is a computer system. However, even if you do not buy that, we tell you it's pretty simple for every individual to see where the line between hate speech and political discussion ends, right? Because exactly when we think that the side of opposition cannot come up here and say that hate speech is something that is already censored, that is already illegal, because we still see it being done on social media and it's not being censored. So if it were illegal, they would have to censor it. They're not doing it right now. This is exactly why it's legitimate for us to support further censoring of it. I do not understand why Ob made such a big deal out of it. However, also note that on our side, regardless if the model works or not, if one less person is coming into contact with Nazi ideologies and one less person will now bully Black people and beat them up from the streets, we think that this policy is justified and we're winning on that. Secondly, on the principle, Nejc gave you an analysis of how, because the company is profit-driven and because they need to make money on their platform, it is legitimate to censor it, because only then, they can sell commercial slots and get more people to stay on their app. We think this is extremely important, and the side of opposition cannot simply say that this is not a principle or this is not an argument that should be valid in this debate, because they have never actually gave a response to it. However, the comparative that they give to you is how the power needs to come from the people. The people need to be the one to decide what will get censored. Know that the majority of the people on social media are not minorities. They are educated. They are like rich white people, and they are not the minorities. Even if they want to claim that the minorities have the power to censor on their side through cancel culture, they will never get the true voice we need to give it to them by taking away the voice of the people that are harming them. Thirdly, most importantly, on the practical. Look, again, we tell you, if one less Black person is afraid on our side to go home at night because all of the hate that is spread through social media, we think you clearly win this debate. Why? Because A, it's better for marginalized groups at the point to which you do not see the comment. For example, I as a female, I do not see a comment that women belong back in the kitchen. I think that at the point to which I see those kind of comments, and I do see them on social media right now, we think that it's better for me, because I will feel like at the point to which there are such comments on social media, I will feel more empowered, and I will not internalize this self-hatred. However, know that private messages are not as big thing as the side of opposition characterize them, because A, I never in my life got such a bad points just chilling on social media. However, also maybe one person gets a bad message on their side, on our side. However, on their side, this message is seen at the public, meaning that other people that have nothing to do with it can see it and internalize it as well. Secondly, when it comes to the society, we tell you that people get in touch with harmful ideologies on their side when this is left out in the open. On our side, even if they are in echo chambers, they are hidden away from people, meaning they have less power, less influence over individuals. And when those individuals, like average Joes, get in contact with, for example, radical ideas, they internalize it. They think it's edgy, and they want to, for example, worship Hitler. We think this is extremely bad, because exactly on their side, those kind of individuals radicalize back to the right, and this is exactly when we think those individuals internalize this kind of things, internalize this behavior, move towards the far right, and on their side, the individuals will vote Trump back in the office in another 4 years. We do not want that to happen. We think that today is a great day where Biden got voted in. Do not let Trump back into office. Censor the social media. We do not want the far right back again. Vote for side of proposition.
Thank you, Emma. Thank you both teams for this final debate. Now I would ask everyone to go back to the main room and wait for the announcement.